Hello, welcome to a quick video here. I'm going to show you how to adjust the valves on your Honda 50cc engine, and this could also be a 70cc, 90cc, pretty much the horizontal Honda engine that can be found in the XR50, XR70, C50, C70, C90, Super Cup 50, 70, 90, Charlie, the Dax, monkey bikes. You name it, it's pretty much going to be the same process between all these engines. Before you begin, you're going to need a 17mm spanner, wrench for those Americans out there. It's going to be to get this cover off. Obviously, if you have a cover with a bigger knot or a bigger hex on it, you're going to need a bigger spanner. And you're also going to need some feeler gauges. 002, 003, that's in inches, 0.05mm, 0.08mm. A very, very large screwdriver, maybe a penny or something. You just need to get this cover off of here so that you can rotate the flywheel, and the flywheel will require a 14mm socket. Okay, step one is to remove the valve covers. 17mm usually. It's this one a little bit hard to get at, but you can usually do so with a flat spanner if you wish. I've already loosened these obviously, but take off both valve covers and you will expose your valves. And the next step, though, don't do anything here, is we're going to go to remove this cap right here and this cap right here if you have it. You might have another style of engine which has the cover and it doesn't have these access ports. You're just going to have to unbolt the entire cover and pull it off. Usually it is only 3 bolts. You can see my cover's absolutely mangled. That's probably because I'm using the wrong kind of screwdriver. A coin works very well so that you don't look like this. Now, after you've uncovered the service ports, what you're going to do is you're going to grab yourself your ratchet and a 14mm socket. It's got to be deep because obviously if you have a shallow one, it's not going to reach the bolt. Okay, now you can see at this access port that you're going to have this little divot, this little cut right there. That is going to be the indicator that you want to line up the flywheel to. So the idea is you're going to be turning the flywheel so that it lines up to that line right there. And so, now that was just a little bit of a turn. Actually, I didn't do that on purpose, but it was right there the whole time. It was very close to top dead center. Sometimes you'll be making lots and lots of turns. I'll show you how quickly you can actually miss it. Just doing that. And you see the T is almost completely out of the way. So if you're spinning it really, really fast like this, you're going to miss the T probably altogether. So you don't want to line it up to the F, you want to line it up to the T. The F is some sort of ignition marker, I believe. And so once you're lined up to the T, and by the way, it can be, you know, a little bit, no, that's a little bit far, but as long as you're kind of in this vicinity here, it doesn't have to be exactly lined up like this. You can be here, that's okay. The main thing is you want to be lined up here, but you're not done yet. Come over here, and you want to wiggle this up and down. Now, if this feels absolutely tight, meaning it feels like there's absolutely no play in here, then that is, and then you have to feel the bottom too. If there's no play whatsoever in these, then you're going to want to rotate this one complete rotation and then come back. Okay, so in this case, and the reason is because this could be, you could actually be one rotation here equals two rotations here equals one rotation here. So to be at top dead center, you might be at top dead center according to the camshaft, or you might be 180 out. You might be, the cam might be rotated all the way around this way, and that will completely throw off your valve clearance, and it will make the valves tight because it's in between when the intake and the exhaust are opening / closing. So if these feel tight, as in there's no wiggle whatsoever, then now you can't really hear it, but this is wiggling back and forth. See if I can go here. Okay, it's not. It's wiggling. That's all I can say. There's a definite. It feels. It doesn't feel like it's going tap tap tap, but it feels kind of like it's loose like this. That's what you want, and so then that is the appropriate mark right here. But like I said, if they're tight, you want to rotate this one 360 degrees. So one full rotation, doesn't matter anti-clockwise, clockwise, and get back to the T, and then make sure that these are wiggly. Now the appropriate clearance for a 50, 70, 90cc version is going to be about 0.05 millimeters, and that's a 2 thou, okay? 0.002 thousandths of an inch. Okay, but let's say that your valve clearances are either too tight or too loose. Now too loose to an extent is actually not too bad. You're just going to have a little bit of a so if you're slightly loose, it's not bad. As bad as having no clearance whatsoever, in which case you could burn the exhaust or the intake valve, whichever valve it is. So what you want to do, however, is I'm just going to set this tight, because people don't like rattly things. I know people say, "Ooh, a tappy valve is a happy valve." I'm not one of those people. I'm like, hey, a tappy valve is excess noise and it gets me irritated. Air-cooled engines, these Hondas, they do tap like a little sewing machine, so keep in mind you will have some tapping. So if you're new to these kinds of engines, don't think there's anything wrong with it. Just make sure the clearance is set right. So let's say you have excess clearance. I'm going to show you how to reset this. And by the way, I back this out so that it has a ridiculous amount of clearance. This would be, I don't even know how much that is, but that's way, way, way exaggerated. And so this will give you an idea. I just did this for video effect. So you can use, I mean, I guess if you have the special tool, you can use that. I don't like special tools because I'm not a special person. So you can take a 9mm curved spanner, you see like this. It cost me all of £1.50, and you back out the knot. If the knot is stuck to the square adjuster like this, you can simply grab it. So put your spanner on here, grab the top, and undo, you know, kind of break it loose like that. Turn it with your fingers until it stops like that. And when it stops like that, and make sure the knot is not what is grounding, is not preventing you from screwing it in further. Make sure that it is actually the adjuster that has gone all the way down. This is called zero clearance. This means this adjuster is actually touching the valve, so that's at 0. And what you're going to do is now you back it out just maybe a quarter turn like that. Now what you can do is take a feeler gauge. See, there's I can never hold these up the right way, and put it in. Try fitting it in between the gap. You see, we're now between the gap. But if I tighten this all the way, just to give you an idea, like that, no longer are we able to fit the gauge in there. See, too tight. So I back it out, and a tiny bit more, and there we go. Now we are in. Okay, so the idea is now this gauge is sitting in there. It's taking up 0.002 inches or 0.05 millimeters. So now take your fingers and just sort of very, very lightly close that adjuster on top of the feeler gauge, so that you can move it around like this, but not freely. It's got to feel, you're going to feel some drag. See, it's got a bit of drag on it. That means that it's making contact, and that is good. So adjust it to that. Okay, and then what you're going to do, then you take your curved spanner, hold the square bit with some decent whatevers, teeth, and tighten down the knot. So you don't want the adjustment to move because it's set to the feeler gauge in the back. You want it to stay still, so that is why you have to grip this with some kind of pliers. Obviously at the end, double check your adjustment, because it just a little bit of movement left to right, clockwise, anti-clockwise, will disrupt the measurement. So what I like to do is a very simple go, no-go method. The idea is if you stick in this tooth thou gauge, this 0.05 millimeter gauge, and if it goes in, it's a little bit, there's a bit of drag on here. It's not impossible to move. You can see I'm just using my fingertips, but it's got enough drag that you can see it's actually bending the gauge. I'm going to show you a thinner gauge. They're all thin. And you see how easily that slides in there. This is 0.015 inches, 0.04 millimeters, so just a 1/100th of a millimeter difference, and you can see visibly how much easier it is to slide that in versus this 0.05 millimeter gauge. So and to double check, I'm going to put in a slightly fatter gauge, and you can see it doesn't want to go in at all. It's stuck. So that's why we call go no go, because if this one goes in and a bigger one does not, then we know our measurement's pretty close to this one. So as I said, double check your measurements. We already did that, and we know that this is good. Of course, check the clearances on the other side. You can see that this one is bang on already. The tooth thou gauge slips in there barely. So I'm going to leave this one be, just put the valve cover back on, and call this good. So what I'm going to do is move on to the valve covers. These you absolutely do not need to replace these. So if the easy way for me to tell is when I start to thread it on by hand, and when I get to the bottom, I can feel it tightening up because it's compressing the O-ring, and that resistance means that that O-ring is being pushed against the sealing surface, which is what you want. If it just tightens down and you don't have much resistance at the end, I recommend replacing the O-ring in there. Very easy to do. Just pick this one out. It's a little hard to get in there with a screwdriver, so I use the tip of a razor blade. Or a small needle, like a threading needle. You can dig out the O-ring. No special instructions except to just oil the O-ring when you put it back on, but as I said, you absolutely don't need to replace them unless they are flattened out, and it's pretty easy to tell if they're flattened out because they tend to get flat. They tend to resist when you get into that last quarter turn or so, like that. Tighten this up with with your spanner or whatever. You don't need to go very tight at all. They're not containing any oil pressure, so they're not going to spray oil everywhere if you don't tighten it hugely. So just a little bit of torque, and that is the basics of how you get your valves adjusted on these engines. Okay, and with the engine in, let's hear it start and see if our valves sound good. Sound pretty quiet. I'm happy with this. Just a note though, when your engine gets warm, this has been cold started, but when your engine gets warm, they'll usually you'll be able to hear a little bit of something on this, and so it's probably not it's not going to be quite 100% of the time. Usually they sound like a little sewing machine, these engines. And just giving a video of when it's warmed up already. It's been ridden for about 15 minutes, so you get to hear it. That's why they call these little sewing machines, is because they just have the tiniest little tick to them. I don't know, to me it's actually quite therapeutic. I can hear the parts working, but it's not invasive or anything. Okay, I'll stop talking. And see you later. Okay, just a little addendum on the gauge-less method for adjusting valves. Some people call it the clock face method. Essentially, you tighten the adjuster all the way down and then you back it from
12 to 10. But if you don't know what that is, you close the adjuster and you back it out 1/6 of a turn approximately. I'm aware of this method. I use it all the time on my genuine Hondas, but the reason I didn't want to include it in this walkthrough is because I've addressed pit bike engines quite often here. And I've noticed that some engines that are not Hondas use a different pitch on the tappets. And so you don't get that 2 thou measurement. If you back it out 6 of a turn, you actually you end up with something different. And so, as I've said, I wanted to... I didn't want to include that method because if somebody has a Honda-based engine, but the tappet is slightly different thread, then it wouldn't work, obviously. I am aware also that the feeler gauge method is not, the silver bullet for getting the perfect measurement. That's why I say double check things at the end. You might have a slight amount of wear on the valve face and the tappet face. And so what's going to happen is when you stick a flat feeler gauge in there, it's going to contact the high points of the tappet because the tappet doesn't necessarily wear evenly. It doesn't wear flat. So I'm aware of that. That's why I say double check things at the end. And if needs be, tighten it down a little bit. But I just wanted to add that little bit note to the end.